Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join the Cyber Warriors Conclave today. Today, we'll be hearing from multiple C-suite and senior executives who are responsible for protecting their company's critical infrastructure, and they will be joined by industry-leading solution providers who support them. We'll learn from these renowned experts on how to protect and defend our business from cyber attacks during the various interactive panels and fast-track discussions. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors and partners, Aruba Networks, Network Perception, FireEye, Mandiant, and Veeam Software for their support. The conclave will kick off with a case study presentation on identifying quick wins and high leverage security controls with cyber threat intelligence by FireEye Mandiant, followed by another case study presentation on Veeam response to modern day cyber threats by Veeam Software. This will be followed by a panel discussion on building a robust cybersecurity strategy with participants from Standard Chartered Bank, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, a global leading investment firm, and one of GCC's leading banks, along with FireEye Mandiant and UTI Cybersecurity, Cloud, and IT. I'd like to call upon Jamie Collier, Cyber Threat Intelligence Consultant, FireEye, to start the day's proceedings.
Thanks, and hello, hi everyone. It's great to be with you here today, and I'm just going to share my screen and get into this. All right, so I trust that you can all see my screen now. And as mentioned, I'm going to really be talking about how we can identify quick wins and really maximize our investment in cybersecurity. And I think this is a really important topic. And I think particularly right now, after the 18 months that we've had, really important right now. Why is that? Well, it's a relentless challenge at the moment. I think for a lot of us working in security, we feel pretty exhausted. Why is that? Well, there are high profile attacks. I think every day in the headlines, often on front pages of the news, we're seeing cybersecurity really dominate that agenda amongst senior executives. Within the Security Operations Center, a lot of false positives, alert fatigue there. I think for CISOs, we're dealing with multiple challenges simultaneously, but yet with finite resources. So we've got to be really pragmatic about how we can maximize that. We're seeing constant vulnerabilities being reported in the news, a lot of them deemed critical, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We've got all these different vendor solutions, got all these emerging threat actors. So I think if I had to distill all of this for security leaders, we've got a lot of complexity. We're having to deal with all of these different challenges simultaneously, and we've got to really make smart decisions. So let's explore some of these. I think first of all, we know we want to improve security, right? And I think the challenge here is that there's just no shortage of different options. So when we're thinking about how to improve security, does that mean that we put in place stricter access controls? Do we need to start having physical, say, FIDO security keys and really bolstering up multi-factor authentication? Is this a challenge of security awareness? Do we need to do more phishing training, for instance? Do we need a zero trust model? Do we need to spend big on email protection services? So we've got all of these different solutions, and I can guarantee no shortage of vendors that are willing to take money to help with these sort of areas, and a lot of that's encouraging. We want kind of different solutions in place, but how do we actually figure out what to choose from? How out of all of these different solutions, which of them are going to be the best investment for my security program, which is going to actually really decisively reduce my attack surface or really improve my security in one way or another? If we continue on looking at the challenge, I think a big kind of conversation for security leaders, senior executives, is around cyber risk. That really tends to be the way that the conversation is framed when we're talking in that leadership context, when we're communicating outside of the security function, when we're communicating to the broader C-suite. really they're going to be asking questions about risk. What does the cyber risk look like? How do we communicate this in risk? But there are challenges here. If we look at how we've typically done cyber risk and the sort of matrices and sort of approach to that, tends to be an exercise where we look at all of the different assets on our network and then consider, well, which of these could be vulnerable? And what we get from this is effectively a long list of potential situations where assets could be compromised, they could be vulnerable. And we get a very long list of things that sound very scary, very alarming, but we don't really have a practical sense of which of these is actually realistic. So what that means is we tend to find that a lot of people will typically put a lot of these potential vulnerabilities, these hypothetical attack vectors, as high risks because they sound very concerning, and it'd be really bad if they were to be exploited by threats out there. Continuing on that conversation, as I said, we've got so many critical vulnerabilities. You're looking here at the CVSS scoring over the previous few years, and you can see there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the high kind of threat or high risk, as well as the critical risk. And that poses challenges for bandwidth. Often we have quite small teams that are managing patching and vulnerability prioritization within an organization. So if that's a small team, how do they potentially deal with 2 or 3 critical vulnerabilities a day? How do they triage those and actually process that? And then the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the challenges is just the number of different attack vectors. So what you're looking at here is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. For those that aren't familiar, this is effectively an index of all of the different attacker techniques. So if a threat wants to gain initial access to your network, are they going to send a spear phishing link? Are they going to conduct a supply chain compromise attack? Something that we've seen a lot in the news over the last year. All of these different attack vectors. Now, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, wow, this is overwhelming, it completely simplifies. It certainly can be. The reason I've got this on the screen is just to highlight that there are so many different attack vectors. And that means that it can be difficult to focus. Going back to those different security controls, those different solutions, no shortage of different options here. And then how do we map that to all of these different attack techniques? It can be difficult to know, really where to get started and how to actually build out a security program in a meaningful way. So with that, I think threat intelligence can be a real enabler of a security function. I think when we talk about all of these different challenges, I think an overarching theme is a question mark on how we get that level of focus. If we're working in the banking sector, what threats do we need to kind of be concerned about? What vulnerabilities do we need to be concerned about? How do we focus on the cyber risks that actually matter? So I think what threat intelligence does is it helps us to navigate through all of those trends, all of those challenges. And if we can get that right, what we have at the end is a real clear focus on what matters most to our security function. What are the big challenges that we need to focus on? And hopefully, rather than endless different attacker techniques or vendor solutions, we're not quite sure where to get started. Hopefully then we can be really focused on knowing exactly where we need to prioritize, where we need to invest, where we need to dedicate our resources from. So I want to dig into this a little bit. But before I do, actually, it's worth talking through that intelligence-led security strategy. So what we're doing here is we're first identifying relevant threats. This could be, well, what are the threats that are prominent in the banking sector, within the Middle East region, within specific countries? What are the threats that we've seen that are really active across the globe in the last 3 months, for instance? Once we have that insight, the most interesting, the most important question that decision makers are going to be asking is, well, how do we take action on the back of that? I'm going to talk about a few different examples, but it might be about patching vulnerabilities that we know are being exploited, or inserting security controls and detection efforts against areas where threat actors are likely to focus on. And I think critically, if we can do that, if we can both identify relevant threats, but then more importantly, take action off the back of that insight, then I think we're in a really exciting place where, as I said, we've got that focus through threat intelligence. But not only that, we're actually able to improve security outcomes. And I think when we're talking in that leadership context, it's got to be outcome driven. We've got to be focused on that end goal. So what is threat intelligence? I've talked about that broader process. Really, what we're talking about with threat intelligence is providing decision advantage to different stakeholders. So we want to equip those different parts of our security function with the insight that they need to make better and faster decisions. So for example, I've already discussed this a little bit, but what are the vulnerabilities that are currently being exploited by threat actors that are targeting, let's say, the Middle East or the banking sector, for instance? What are those detection efforts and security controls that we can use that will really help us to focus against common attack techniques, for instance? So what we can do is we can look at, say, advice on emerging threats to understand how we can actually mitigate those. So really what we're doing with threat intelligence, taking that understanding of the threat landscape and translating that into action items, translating that into better decision-making across the entire security function. And that point around across the entire security function is actually really important, because threat intelligence has to be relevant. And to be relevant, it means that we've got to talk to different parts of the security function, different stakeholders. And I think threat intelligence is best seen as an opportunity. And it's an opportunity really for anyone working in cybersecurity to make better and smarter decisions. So as you can see here on the screen, I've outlined a few different types of intelligence, but really what I'd ask you to focus on is that column on the right. It's those different stakeholders. So whether you are a business leader, a security leader, for instance, maybe a CISO, whether you're working in security operations, vulnerability management, I passionately believe that there really is something for everyone when it comes to threat intelligence, that all of these different stakeholders can benefit from threat intelligence. So what I want to do now is talk about, we've talked at the start of this discussion about some of the challenges, some of the problems, some of the reasons why security and the industry maybe feel quite exhausting at the moment. Well, how can we make that easier? How can we actually get that focus amidst the noise? I talked about the challenges of cyber risk assessments when we're not quite sure what's practically being exploited. As I said, we've got a load of assets, thinking about how they might be vulnerable. We end up getting a very long list of what we consider high risk, high severity potential incidents. But what if we put threat intelligence in? What if we actually put an understanding of adversary activity, what's going on in the last 6 months within the banking sector? All of a sudden, out of all of those potential vulnerabilities that might be exploited, we're able to add in a much clearer sense of, well, what are the vulnerabilities we've actually seen exploited in the last 6 months? What are the key threats that are targeting your sector? What are they actually doing? And if we get that sort of insight, what we very quickly get is a clear sense of, well, out of all of these potential assets and vulnerabilities and how those assets could be kind of exploited, we get a much clearer sense of, well, this is a high risk because we've seen this happen in the last year. We've seen it happen by threat actors that we know are going to be interested in our sector, versus low risks where, we're certainly aware of this, but we've not actually seen too much activity here. So it's maybe not as much of a concern. Get much clearer focus here. I talked about MITRE ATT&CK and all of those different attacker techniques. And as I said, this can be really difficult. We might see all of those different security solutions and simply invest in different areas, right? We might think, okay, we're gonna really prioritize these sorts of areas across our security function. But what if the main threat actors targeting the banking sector within the Middle East? What if these areas circled in red are actually the attacker techniques that are most common? We might have invested in those areas in green, but we've not actually really improved security in any serious or tangible way, because we're not aligning our investments to the threat at hand. So with that, threat intelligence, and critically threat intelligence linked to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, can be a real enabler for any security function. So I want to talk through this in a few different ways. I think first of all, we can very quickly provide, for example, MITRE mapping to specific threat actors, specific malware variants, specific ransomware groups, for instance. We can then start looking at, well, out of all of these, which of those that are relevant to my sector? And then I can start to see, okay, these are the sort of attacker techniques that the threat actors I'm worried about are conducting. If I can do that, I can then start to think much more clearly about the security controls that I need. But we can do this for different threat groups, for maybe some Iranian groups, maybe some cybercrime groups, maybe some kind of Chinese espionage groups, etc. But I think we can actually do better than just MITRE mapping. And I think we can do better in at least 3 different ways. So first of all, for those working in the Security Operations Center, threat intelligence can provide much more tactical data, right? It can talk about not just the sort of a broad attacker technique, but well, what are the file names, the file paths being created by this threat actor? What are the processes that they're executing? If we know all of that, we can have a much clearer sense of how to hone in our detection efforts to detect threat actors as soon as they get into our network. So if we know exactly how they escalate privileges or move laterally within a network, we've got our binoculars there, ready, looking out for that activity, ready to respond as and when something happens. But at a strategic level, we can also look at this in a much more macro perspective. So for example, let's say there are 40 threat actors that we were concerned about, maybe 40 threat actors that had targeted banking organizations in the last few months. Well, we could look at, out of all of those, which are the most common attacker techniques. So we might see, for instance, here, all of these different attacker techniques are being used, but maybe PowerShell and Command Shell are by far the most prominent attacker techniques. That means out of all of these different areas we might want to be focused on, we can focus on the most common areas. We can get that kind of high leverage security controls. If we can add security controls against these areas, then we're really wiping out large parts of our attack surface very quickly with just maybe 1 or 2 security controls. And as well as that sector perspective, we can also do this from a global perspective as well. So one thing I would certainly encourage you all to do is check out the Mandiant M-Trends report, where what we do is we actually provide MITRE attack mapping across everything we've seen over the past year. And you'll see that there are some of these really common attacker techniques. So whether that is targeting, via remote desktop protocol, you could see the likes of exploiting public-facing applications, or phishing are really popular methods of gaining initial access, for instance. So if we can get all of this, we can actually start to really focus on those prominent attacker techniques. And these are quick wins, because if we can insert security controls against, say, the 10 or 20 most popular, most prominent attacker techniques, if we can really focus on those, insert security controls, then we can very quickly wipe out huge swaths of our attack surface, our attack exposure, etc. Finally, I talked about how there's so many critical vulnerabilities. And I think the challenge here has always been that the way that we kind of look at cyber risk when it comes to vulnerabilities is, well, how bad would it be if it were to be exploited? Now, what we've looked at is actually a different approach with threat intelligence, where we're not just looking at how bad would it be if it were to be exploited. We're also looking at, well, has it been exploited? Is it being actively exploited in our sector, in the banking sector? Is there proof of concept code available, etc.? And if we have all of that understanding, well, what's actually being exploited in practical settings, what we find actually is the number of critical or high-risk vulnerabilities actually becomes much lower. That's because out of all of those vulnerabilities that sound very scary, sound very concerning, it might be that they're actually incredibly difficult to exploit, or that they're just not being exploited. So really what I want to finish on here is just that opportunity for threat intelligence and that empirical insight into adversary behavior to actually be able to help us navigate all of the noise in the industry, but I think critically gain additional focus. And I think right now with everything going on in the world, it's that ability to focus on what matters that can be really important. Thanks very much, everyone, and happy to take questions at this time.
I don't think we've got any questions, Jamie. We'll direct them to you if they come through to us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Up next, we've got another showcase titled Beam Response to Modern Day Cyber Threats by Saif Rahman. who's a senior systems engineer for Veeam Software. Saif?
Hey, thank you very much, Karan. Just want to verify that everybody can hear me and you guys can see me clearly, Karan?
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to share my screen and we'll just click on. So my screen is visible to you, Karan, right? And I assume it's visible to everyone. Karan?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, perfect. Okay, guys, thank you very much for joining today. And I know it takes a lot of efforts, and Karan and his team, they did a splendid job together, all of us today here. My name is Saif Rahman. I work as a senior system engineer for Veeam Software. Rather than getting into my introduction, I think probably I'll just go straight to the point. So today we're going to discuss Veeam response to modern day cyber threats. And we'll look into a couple of things today, because as you all know that Veeam is very much in the Gartner Magic Quadrant in the leadership state in the last 5 years as a data management and data protection service provider. Now, you can have any kind of security and any kind of security measures that you can take, but there need to be there need to be some sort of line of defense if the threat or any kind of malware or anything get into your infrastructure. How you're going to handle it, and the best thing you can do is you need to have some kind of data protection mechanism available, some kind of backup provided to you, so that in case if you're hit by any kind of such issue, you should be able to do the recovery. But that is one part of it. But there need to be that in case of infrastructure, likewise your live data is prone to the threat of like a ransomware or any kind of other kind of threats. Likewise, your backup files, your backup data, especially in the kind of a financial institution where I have, let's say, my financial records, my data that is very, very critical for my business, and especially in the banking sector where you have some sensitive information, you need to be able to protect it. So Veeam emerged as a cloud data management platform. And we'll look into the details like what kind of services we are talking about, what kind of assets we are protecting here, on-prem, in cloud, SaaS, your maybe, let's say, Office 365 kind of scenario where you have Office 365 data. So we'll look into that. Next thing we'll look into that, what kind of protection strategy that Veeam has to offer, like what it advocates in terms of completely protect your data. Talking about now modern day cyber threat, and we don't talk about ransomware, that would be quite unjust towards the ransomware. It's because it's no longer about if, it's more about when. So you need to have your tools, you need to be well equipped to protect your assets. And how Veeam respond to it. So what kind of tools and what kind of mechanism that Veeam provides as a solution to counter these kinds of situations, or to avoid rather these kinds of attacks. And then we'll look into our action plan, what we need to do. So starting with what Veeam does. So it's no longer protecting your on-prem infrastructure, like, for example, your physical server, your virtual infrastructure based on VMware, Hyper-V, Nutanix, or any other hypervisor, or your physical infrastructure, your physical server, because still, believe it or not, some organizations, they do have, and they need to, there is a requirement for them to have physical infrastructure in their environment. Your database and application, their granular recovery, and if I want to restore something out of granularly from my backup. So Veeam provides all those kinds of mechanisms. Plus Data protection for Office 365. This is a very common collaboration and messaging tool these days. So Office 365, yeah, it's unavoidable that any organization, one way or the other, is not using these services either as a SaaS or maybe on-prem, SharePoint, Exchange, and all those kinds of applications. Then you have your assets in the cloud, like Azure Virtual Machine, Amazon EC2 instances, Google virtual machines, how you protect them. So all those kinds of mechanism, all those kinds of assets, they need to be protected. And since you are touching the cloud, you're touching on-prem, so you can imagine you are dealing with data all over the place, and there has to be some kind of security measure that needs to be taken and it needs to be provided to protect those data. And I'm talking about not only the assets, but also the backup data itself. Like, for example, imagine you have a backup and that has been compromised, and you have a ransomware attack and somebody encrypts it and demands you for the money. So that's a very bad situation that anyone would have. All my historical data, my let's say very important files or some financial data, everything will be compromised. And I have been protecting it for, let's say, for the compliance purpose, maybe 6 years, 7 years of compliance policy that I have. Now, what Veeam advocate is always says that you need to have 3-to-1 rule applied. You need to have 3-to-1 rule. This means that one of your backup copy, one of your copy is your actual production data itself, like a file, it's a form of virtual machine or physical machine, but you need to have 2 other copy of your data on 2 different set of media. So that even if something breakthrough from your security infrastructure and gets hold of your backup, then you have 2 different medias available, and one of them should be off-site. And the most probably the best way you can protect it is to keep it offline or in air gapped. Usually we used to have tape, but we all know that it's a very cumbersome process to use tape. And nowadays, with the evolution of S3 object storage, and it's cheap and it's available, and it gives you kind of feeling like a disk, so you can do a lot of things out of it. Many of the organizations, they like to keep the data, whether it's on-prem S3 compliant storage or in the cloud. But that storage also needs to be protected for us in one way or the other. How many times we have seen that you have your backups, you have your data available, when you restore it, it doesn't really work for the organization, because there is most of the organization, many organizations is still today, they don't have any automated mechanism available to test your backups to see that if data is recoverable. In addition to that, when you do the backup of your assets, you never know that if it has been affected, because these days those cyber threats, they are very smart. They sit in your organization, they stay there, wait for the right time, and boom, there you go. They start affecting your data all of a sudden. So you need to have some kind of recovery mechanism available that allows you to test your data. And of course, and that has to be done in a kind of isolated environment, which is, away from your actual production network. Let's talk a bit about ransomware. So ransomware, what it does, it actually sabotages your data. It directly hits actually your data. Either it disallow you to access your machine or your assets, or else it just encrypts it and asks you for the ransom. Now, even if you provide the ransom, you need to do something, which is, I think the only thing you can do is pray that they can return back your data, because even if you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee that the attacker is so kind enough to release your data. Plus, you don't want to reach in this situation where you have to pay ransom. So there has to be some kind of mechanism available that protects you from this kind of scenario. So ransomware is real. It's not about if, it's actually about when. They are very smart, and you can see from the numbers here, 93% organization attacked every year. This is very high, and you can see the dollar values here, how much it impacts your business. And if you are in the financial business, banking sector, it's totally a chaos situation, I must say. So what can we do? Number one, we can pray, and we all know that that can only be answered if you do something about it. Other than that, nobody, even God, will not help you. Second thing is that you can rely on your anti-malware softwares, and your maybe IDS, IPS system, firewalls, and all those security measures that you take. And the third thing is that, like many organizations, they say, that's very complex. Let's stick to prayer and hope that it never happens, which is not going to be the case. How we respond to it. So that is very important, that how we respond to it. What tools does Veeam provide in order to achieve our objective to secure our backups and our recoverability, to enable our recoverability in case if something get compromised. Our world-class monitoring tool, Veeam One, it gives you monitoring mechanism on not only on your backup or your backup files, it can even send you the alert if there is something fishy going on in your infrastructure. For example, let's say if you are all of a sudden you notice that your backup files increase exponentially, or if you have a certain level of a spike, which is not normal in your network environment in terms of CPU utilization, memory utilization, or anything that is abnormal happening here, you can always rely on Veeam One, because it will alert you, it will help you to isolate the problem and do the necessary measures to fix that. So that is the monitoring, like you have an eye on your infrastructure, that what you need to do, and if there is something wrong, somebody should be able to alert you. In addition to Veeam One, Veeam also provides you data integration API, and we'll look into that in a bit, like in the upcoming slides, that how it is useful, because it unlocks the endless opportunity for the organization to integrate with their backup files, classify their data, and do a lot of things. It's like endless opportunity for you to deal with your data. Then we have, of course, our data labs. Data labs is the another Veeam mechanism that allows you to create an isolated network environment where you can actually restore your data without affecting your production network, your production infrastructure. You can restore it just for the audit purpose, compliance purpose, to see that if you have something SLA to follow, dictated by your organization, or else if you want to create a kind of a sandbox environment where you can just power up those machine or dependent machine. I'm talking about like powering up multiple machines, and we have instant recovery available where you can power up your multiple machines from the backup. So we leverage it along with our data labs mechanism, that you can exploit it and you can power it up, and we have built-in scripts available that can even test your certain application. But if you have like kind of a your OS, your applications, your health of your machine, everything can be tested, and you can get the report that, okay, if it has been successful or you need to do something. So that is very, very useful. So that is something you can leverage on. And using the data labs, you can do one more thing, which is stage restore. So for example, if you want to restore a machine, you're not sure what happened to that machine, and if you have some kind of concern, you can restore it in data lab, you can log into it, you can check it, you can test it, and then when you are satisfied, and if you have to do some changes, you can apply those changes. Let's say somebody added some kind of additional records and something which is not supposed to be there, and then you can move it to your actual production environment. So it's like a stage restore. You have a staging area where you can power it up and then you can bring it back. And that happens not only for the machine, for the OS, but also the application I'm talking about. Then we have a secure restore mechanism. Like I said, when we did the backup, we don't know if the machine is affected. Let's say after 2-3 days, you come to know that machine has some kind of code which is not supposed to be there. When you do the restore, how will you verify that you are restoring from the healthy backup? Because you've been taking the backups throughout the week or throughout the days, and maybe multiple times a day. We have a mechanism called secure restore that allows you to actually scan using your own antivirus, and we have integration with all sort of antivirus provided that they have command line support. That's it. And it can test like if the machine has a problem, if there is a virus attack or anything, any kind of attack there, it will inform you, and then we'll see the actual process in a while. Then, as I said, in the long-term retention, nowadays there's a shift from tape media, which is air gapped, and naturally it's isolated, and it can be offline. But if you are using the object storage, whether it's on-prem S3 compliant object storage or in the cloud, there has to be some kind of locking mechanism available. So object storage, they have their own object locking mechanism. Veeam is capable of exploiting it through its APIs. Looking at the real-time monitoring from Veeam 1, like you see that there is a list of warning, and it's quite an interactive tool, quite advanced tool that allows you to do the monitoring of your host, your clusters, and even your backup itself. Our Veeam backup and replication software, it's a repository where you're writing your backups. You can do the near real-time 24/7 monitoring, and it will issue you the alerts if there is anything fishy or anything that is not unusual happening on your system or on your infrastructure. Like I said, data integration API. So you can actually, once you use our data integration API, which means that you can leverage Veeam backup files to do a lot of things. So if I start talking about it, I think it's a topic of its own. You have, like I said, you have endless opportunity to do a lot of things. So once you have data integration API, if you have gurus, if you have people who are good at API integration, you can do endless things with our backups. Just dig a little deeper into that secure restore, how it works. So Veeam, once you start your restoration process, let's say if I have this is the example of, let's say, a virtual machine. And if I want to restore that virtual machine, and I don't know when it was infected with let's say virus or any kind of malicious code or any kind of threat, what Veeam does is it uses its mount server to mount that machine and actually scans through its file system and see if there is any threat detected. It gives you two options. Either if you want to restore it, you can restore it with network adapter disable, or else you can restore it, or else you can abort it completely. Like, for example, if you have a very, very secure environment, military kind of, or if you have a financial institution and you don't want to restore at all and you want to try a different image to restore from, you can actually abort it and you say that, okay, now I want to go back to the previous backup or the backup which was taken before the infection, and I want to try that as well. And if nothing is found, it can straight away allow you to do the restore like a normal recovery. So very, very powerful mechanism that can help you, easily restore your data, your assets, just in case if there is something affected your data. Again, let's dig deeper inside the data labs. So that is another very powerful tool that allows you to, like if you look here, these are my production machines. I have backup here sitting on my backup storage. I can power them up in an isolated network environment to test if my backup is recoverable, if everything is fine with my application, my data, my operating system. And it performs 2-3 kinds of tests. One is that if with the hypervisor that requires, of course, if it's XXI, you need to have VM2s. If Hyper-V, you have to have integrated Hyper-V client component. But it checks that if there is anything, if the machine is fine. The second thing is that it creates the docking mechanism because it's a isolated network environment, but it pings it and see if the machine is up and running, what is the status of the OS and everything. And in the end, it also verifies the application, like for example, Exchange, SQL, Oracle, SharePoint, Active Directory, Global Catalog, DNS. So we have built-in mechanism to test all these applications, except if there is something which is unique, which is custom built. You can also embed your own scripts to test the application in case if application is running fine, if there's something wrong with that. That enables you to verify the recoverability of your virtual machine. If something goes wrong with your virtual machine, something got corrupted, maybe your registry or anything in case of Windows, or in case of Linux, something went wrong, it can verify it and it can let you know what is happening there. You can use it as a sandbox for just in case if you want to power them up and you say that, okay, it's good. I have the audit report and it says everything is fine. But I have an administrator who is a kind of paranoid and he wants to check what is going on those machines. So you can power them up. You can again test it. So all these tools are there to verify that in case if you hit by any kind of attack or ransomware or anything, you have valid backups available to perform the recovery. And of course, you can use it for the stage restore. So you restore it in that staging area, verify everything, and then you can move it to your production. Very important topic. Like I said earlier, that since we are moving to the cloud, so there has to be some kind of locking mechanism available. Now, as we know that S3 compliant storage, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, they provide locking mechanism, object locking mechanism, and governance. So we can exploit that from Veeam side, and that allows us to lock our files. Locking files means that if I define the retention of, let's say I want to lock this file for next 7 days or 14 days, within that time frame, even if you are S3 administrator, you will not be able to log in and delete or modify or do anything with those files. So this mechanism is absolutely targeting the ransomware attack, because ransomware requires some kind of writing on those files so that you can encapsulate them and encrypt them, and ask you for the ransom. So these files get locked. Now with our earlier release, this mechanism was available with S3 storage, but then question comes in that not every environment, especially in the banking sector, sometimes they are not allowed to use the object storage, and sometimes they don't have on-prem object storage. So what can I do if I have to write my backups on the on-prem normal kind of SAN attached storage or something like that? With our new release, now we have Linux hardened repositories, which means that all our requirements is that you need to have a Linux-based repository, Linux storage, which means that it could be Red Hat-based Ubuntu or CentOS, and there are other flavors which we support, which allows you to lock those files. So even if you are a Linux administrator, if you want to delete those files or modify those files, you will not be able to do so, because we have the similar locking mechanism available for your on-prem data storage. So if you write it on-prem, it also locks your file. So if you look at the this immutability in detail, so imagine if I have on-prem repository where I am writing my data, which means that in most of the organizations, especially in the financial institution, you have short-term retention and then you have long-term retention. Usually, people go for short-term retention on-prem storage. But with our new Linux hardened repository, you can write it here and you can make it immutable as well, which means that nobody will be able to delete it till the period of expiry of immutability. Now, you can also leverage object storage immutability as well. So you can copy the same data on the object storage or any S3 compliant object storage, and you can use immutability. But just for the sake of, because I know that most of the banking sector, they're not allowed to go to the cloud, but if you are, and if you're allowed, then you can also not only leverage the immutability on the capacity tier, which is normal S3 object storage, but you can also use the same immutability at the Glacier level. So we now do support archiving tier, which is the Amazon Glacier. So this immutability mechanism protects your file and is especially built mechanism for the ransomware attack, which is the main threat these days, and everybody likes to talk about it. Now the action plan, get paranoid. You need to follow the trends. Of course, I mean, we can provide you n number of mechanisms to protect your data, make sure your data assets are clear and they are safe and they are recoverable. But end of the day, you need to follow the trends. You need to reevaluate your infrastructure, not only in terms of infrastructure, but also you need to keep an eye on, like, because if they're new to it, Veeam is also evolving itself, because if there is something new comes up, Veeam also provides the mechanism to safeguard you against that threat. So you need to follow it in the form of trends. Prioritize your data assets. What do you need to protect? Which are important data? What you need to put in the on-prem repository? How do you want to protect it? If there is a requirement to keep it immutable, if there are certain data which is not really that important, so you need to classify and prioritize your data. Do backup infrastructure hardening. So yes, so we now have Blaze hardening repository. So make sure that your backups are security hardened and they are immutable, in order to protect you from any kind of, just in case if somebody walks in through from your security parameter, be it firewall or antivirus or anything, it should not impact your last line of defense, which is your backup infrastructure. And always try DR in action. So you have capability to test your recoverability, not only on-prem, but also you can do it on the DR side. So Veeam doesn't stop you from doing that. So always keep your infrastructure backup tested and make sure that they are always available in case if you need them. And that's very much it from me. And if you have any questions, please.
Thank you, Saifur, for that presentation. Do we have any questions? I don't think we've got any questions. If we do get any questions regarding your presentation, we'll be sure to pass them on to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on, our next is talking about building a robust cybersecurity strategy. This is moderated by Muhammad Ishtiaq Hussain, who's the CEO for UTI Cybersecurity, Cloud and IT LLC. Muhammad, are you with us today?
Hello. Can you hear me now? Yeah, Karthik.
Can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you very much. I think we can start. Okay, so thank you everyone. And my name is Muhammad Ishtiaq. I am CEO for UTI Cybersecurity and Cloud. So we'll start our session. So I'll request all our panelists to come up one by one. I'll take their names. First of all, I request Mr. Ahmad Mahmood. He can switch on his camera and mic and introduce himself. Mr. Ahmad. Mr. Ahmad Mahmood.
He is online, but I think he's not able to switch on his camera. You can introduce the others and he will join. Okay,
Yes.
he's here.
Yes, hello everyone.
Hello, Ahmad.
Thanks for the opportunity to participate in this panel. So my name is Ahmed Nabil, and I'm currently the Regional Information Security and Risk Officer at Standard Chartered Bank, UAE.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Ahmed. Thanks for the introduction. And next panelist, I request Dr. Tim to come up and switch on his camera and introduce himself.
Well, good evening from Sydney, Australia. My name is Dr. Tim Nedelkov, and I'm a Technology Information Security Officer at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is the Australia's largest bank.
Thank you, Doctor. And now I request Mr. Saju Sani to come up and switch on his mic and video and please introduce himself. Mr. Saju Sani.
Hi everyone, this is, are you able to see me or?
Yes, clear, yeah, we can see you.
Hi, this is Saji from Dubai. Welcome to the session. I'm actually cybersecurity manager for one of the leading bank in GCC. And I have overall 20 years of experience in information technology. in that 13 years in amazing banking sector, the sector most attacks are highly targeted nowadays, right? And based on my professional experience, hope I will be able to contribute some valuable input during the session.
Thank you, Saju. Thanks for the introduction. Now I request Mr. Mohammed Bashir to switch on his mic and video and introduce himself. Mr. Mohammed Bashir. Mr. Mohammed Bashir.
Sorry, he'll not be able to join us today.
Okay, then we'll go to move next. Okay, I request Jamie to come up and introduce himself. Anyway, he has given the presentation, but quick introduction and switch on his camera and mic.
Yeah, hi everyone. For those that weren't on the earlier discussion, I'm Dr. Jamie Collier, and I work for Mandiant as a threat intelligence consultant. So spend my time briefing organizations on the threat landscape and what threats matter to them, but perhaps more interestingly, what they can do about those threats.
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks for the introduction. Now I request Mr. Saifullah Ismail to come up and introduce himself.
Hi guys, my name is Shafiullah. I'm from Abu Dhabi. I'm actually working for a global investment firm where I'm heading the cybersecurity function for them. Almost like 16 plus years of experience in this domain. Pleasure meeting you all through this platform. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you and welcome on board. I think we'll start with the local perspective first, and then maybe regional, global, and as well as we'll take the input from our colleagues from the vendors. So first of all, my first question will be, how can financial institutions better prepare and respond to uprising ransomware attacks? So I request Saju Sani if he can answer this and give some thought on this, please.
Thanks. Actually, today morning when I woke up and when I was having my coffee, I saw one video in LinkedIn where, somewhere I think it's in Iran, some central jail, suddenly, the control room, someone is watching the screen. All of a sudden, boom, 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 all screens vanish, right? It's all become black. So it looks like it was a ransomware attack or some malware attack. So what I was thinking during my coffee, I was thinking, what happened if this situation happened to security operations center, right? How do we prepare? Like, we can't, no one can stop this scenario right now. Anything can happen. You might have a lot of different controls, but this situation no one can avoid. So what we need to do, we need to prepare, and we need to prepare for, we need to face this situation in future. So we need to prepare. So what is my recommendation as a best practice, and what I think, most of the banking sector in this region follow, is everyone prepare pre-incident plan, which is PIP. And the second one is critical response, security incident response plan. Then, as Cypher said, that the backup and recovery plan is very important, where we need to make sure the RPO and RPO. These are the just preparedness. But what we mainly need to do is, like, we have so many controls, email controls, we have web browsing controls, we have physical controls, the USB controls. But these controls, once you put, we need to have regular compliance check. How good is your email control? How good is your, for example, proxy control? Is there any change happen? So is your sandbox is properly configured? So these are the things we need to make sure, like, on regular intervals, the compliance check has to be done. And if possible, like, I am not sure, many organizations may be able to afford this. You should have armed resource who is highly technical and do regular purple team exercise. I'm from defender side. So what happened? New TTPIC in the market, like, there are so many threat intelligence I get. So what should I do? I should simulate this in my lab environment or my environment, in my control environment, and I should see, or I should learn new lessons and try to implement these new additional controls, like, maybe custom detection. These all are technical level, but what is my weakest link in my network? That is my user. So whatever control you put in place, you need to give proper education, so cybersecurity awareness course. So you need to give it every maybe my suggestion is give every quarterly, right? So what I seen, we give a lot of cybersecurity awareness to the employees, but it happens like, it's because of some regulation, it happened once in a year, but that is not the case, right? We see like people come and leave during the year. So who is giving to the training to the new guys? Is it part of your HR onboarding process? So we need to make sure the cybersecurity awareness session is given when users are onboarded. So human firewall is the best and the strongest pillar to defend ransomware. And not only ransomware, any kind of security incident, right? So they know, the user says, I'm not expecting this mail. I'm not going to click this mail because I don't know the person. I'm not going to open the attachment, right? These are the two main channel where any enterprise can get compromised.
Thank you, Sajid. And I request now Mr. Ahmed Mahmood to give us some regional perspective on this. Question is, how can financial institution better prepare and respond to the uprising ransomware attacks?
Yes, thanks a lot, Mohammed. And I think Sajid have summarized a lot of things. But let me say that most of our organizations working in the financial sector field, they know they can become a target for any ransomware, whether they are a big organization, small organization, global brand or not. This is something fact that we are living with due to the nature of this sector and how risky and how it's dealing with a lot of sensitive information. So I would like to summarize this, that all we need to do and what we have read in a lot of books, a lot of courses, maybe not applied, but we need to ensure that we have a kind of a multi-layered approach. This multi-layered approach will be starting from the entry points, for example, things like the phishing attacks, the mails, the malicious mails that come. So starting from this, again, moving through the awareness of the people, as Sajid mentioned, which is one of the main concepts, which is ensuring that we have some kind of email safety education. We have a full training for our staff. We have the right technical security controls as well for systems, devices, endpoints, mobile devices, and so on. We have, of course, been a very nice session before from one of the backup solutions. We have a proper data and system backup. This should be endorsed inside our own disaster recovery and our incident management procedure that all the organizations are adopting. So this is very important because we need our security personnel and technology people to always have a chat and have a discussions with senior management and the business about these data backups and how this can handle ransomware. For example, how this would be effective, what's the timing required, things like the RTO and RPO and all these kind of things. So I would try to summarize it mainly as having a multi-facet or a multi-layer approach covering everything, whether it's human, technical, from the start till the end.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Now I request Shafiullah Ismail to please give his view on this issue or the challenge.
Thank you, Sajid and Ahmed. I think you guys pretty much covered most of the key areas where when any organization needs to be prepared for the ransomware attacks. I'll complement some of the additional points to your existing conversation. So creating an awareness is very important because people, process, technology comes into the picture, right? So session, awareness to the users, knowing about what is ransomware, what are the ways the ransomware can propagate into the network. That is very much important. That's number one. Number two, today, the most discussed topic in every organization from the cybersecurity office is about the ransomware, right? So technology comes into the picture. Today, we talk about the defense in depth approaches, right? But who is connecting those solutions? Who's integrating those solutions? Are security solutions capable of talking to each other, passing on the threat intel feeds, blocking on certain zones? So that is more important. It's not that I buy an antivirus, I buy a APT, I buy a SIM solution and just manage it on a point basis, right? So everything has to be correlated. Everything has to be injected into a threat management platform. So we get a lot of threat feeds, what is happening around the globe. So that's more important. So the technology has to be provisioned in such a way that it has to start predicting the attacks, and that's where the one of the forward approach to block the ransomware is you need to start predicting the attacks. That's one thing. The other one is, I would say, how effective is our SIM solution? So today, most of, I would say all organizations, they have a SIM platform. We need to see how we are turning this SIM platform from a traditional approach to a next gen, analytics based approach. So data is more important. So with that data, you can constantly monitor what is the risk area, what is the potential that you may be impacted with the ransomware. You can see the behavior of the emails, what the users are getting, right? So it's more of a behavior based assessment, and constantly, I would recommend that if we want to protect our infrastructure against a ransomware, we need to conduct a security assessment against our infrastructure. We need to run through some of the simulation attacks against our organization in a controlled manner, just to understand like what is our weak areas, the risk areas, and we can immediately mitigate that. Overall, building a robust incident management plan will also help us, because to quickly recover from the service in case if something goes wrong. So that is also one of the key crown jewels in being prepared for the ransomware kind of an attack. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shafira. So now I request Dr. Tim to give his thought and give us a perspective from the environment where he operates, and what are his thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the previous speakers kind of covered quite a lot. I think probably I will bring a slightly different perspective. I'm a firm believer on people and processes. You can have the best pieces of technology available, but you still need smart and capable people to actually operate the pieces of technology that you have. So investing in people, making sure that they are up to the standard that you expect. Also, your processes, incident response, that's great. I am yet to find a big financial institution which doesn't have an incident response plan. How often do you test it? Simple example, I was doing some consulting work with a large organization, and with the 11 contacts that I had with my incident response first contacts, 5 of them were no longer with the organization for more than 12 months. So making sure that you're up to date with what is changing within the organization, within the business, is something that is not the job of the business owner to tell you, hey, by the way, I have a change in my business line. It's part of cyber or whatever your position to make sure that you have everything up to standard. And also something that is a little bit tricky, especially in financial industry, but I highly recommend if you really want to push the limits. If you really believe that you have your standard operating procedures, your incident response procedures up to standard, give them to a third party to test them. And you will be surprised about the gaps that you will discover. And the whole idea of having that kind of holistic view of what is actual situation in your environment will help you to educate your executives, make sure that you give them enough information to make the best informed decisions. So that's my perspective, and I totally agree with everything that our speakers already said.
Thank you, Dr. Tim. Now I'd like to learn more from Dr. Jami now from his global perspective, especially sitting with Farah and Mendian. So we'll have the bigger understanding and the say data where you can give us some better feedback to us. Yeah, Dr. Jami.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much. I think maybe a few points to make. I think first of all, we're talking about how to prevent ransomware, but I think that's arguably too narrow a perspective. So what I mean by that is actually ransomware is often only deployed at the very end of operation conducted by hackers, right? They're often using various downloaders, Trojans, etc., backdoors as part of that operation. And if we're only concerned about the ransomware variant, it's often too late. By that point, the actor might have moved within a network. They might have escalated privileges. They might have stolen that data. And actually, it's going to be really expensive and difficult to remediate if we just focus on that ransomware variant. So I think we almost want to zoom back and understand what does that entire attack lifecycle look like? What are the different Trojans, the backdoors being used? And make sure that we have our detection efforts, that we have a security strategy in place, really across the whole spectrum of malicious tools being used. And that gives us a chance to detect and prevent ransomware operations much earlier. So I think that's the first opportunity for everyone. I think the second thing is that ransomware operations are increasingly using a variety of extortion tactics. So what I mean by that is it's well understood that ransomware often uses encryptors and renders systems unusable, for instance. That's well understood. But we're also seeing ransomware operations increasingly involve data theft, where these threat groups will threaten to leak data online if a ransom isn't paid. We're actually seeing ransomware groups contact the media to make sure that stories are written about victims, contacting, say, a victim's business partners, their suppliers, their peers to drum up pressure. We're even seeing denial of service attacks being used in conjunction with these ransomware operations. So what that means is that there are a variety of challenges that ransomware represents, and that leads to a variety of responses that are now required. So if we're talking about ransomware preparedness, it's not just about the encryptor, it's also about, well, are we prepared for that data theft component? Do we have the legal and the public relations infrastructure, the plan in place to deal with, well, if data is leaked, what are the regulatory impacts? What are the kind of media perception impacts if there are stories written about us? So that means we really need an interdisciplinary approach that is looking at the different challenges that ransomware pose and building out plans. I think finally, kind of going back to maybe some of the talk I mentioned, some of the points I mentioned in my talk, but variety of different attack vectors used within ransomware. And if we take intelligence, if we take, as you mentioned, that global perspective on the most prominent attacker techniques, we can then start to actually look at, well, what are the attacker techniques happening time and time again when it comes to ransomware? So I completely echo the points earlier in the presentation about humans often being targeted through, say, spear phishing emails. But we also see a huge amount of focus from ransomware groups on the likes of targeting remote desktop protocol, exploiting public-facing applications, for instance. So I think we want to just be aware of those common attack techniques conducted by those ransomware groups and really make sure that we're focusing on those as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jami. So now let's take another question now, a different one. So question I will ask again to Mr. Saju Sani.
So Hussein, I just want to add one point in the
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So we see there are few techniques which recently people are following, like the deception technology, right, where they have decoys sitting in their organization. Mm-hmm. There might be chances, this ransomware attack, like this can be lured to this particular decoys. That is one. Also, maybe in the past you might be seen that there are so many news where one particular company got ransomware hit, then they did some incident response, but after 6 months down the line, again the same company get again hit. So I think there are some what you call sleeper cells in the network, right? Because they know they have the persistence in the network. They will activate once they get the ransom pay. Then maybe after 6 months, the sleeper cells will be activated. So when we are doing that the IOC, the TTP and IOC collection, then we also need to consider this kind of situation where there will be presence of sleeper cells in your the network.
Yeah, I think this needs an holistic view and starting from basics to make sure you're, as everybody explained, that your patching is done on a timely basis and your vulnerability scans are happening on the timely manner. Yeah. Our patches are being applied and fixed on a timely basis. So these are and plus there are several operational challenges are also there which are being faced by organizations today. Yeah, thank you for your thought. Okay, so the next question is now, and this for all the panelists, that how can emerging fintech companies best uplift cybersecurity capabilities to ensure secure products and services? So this question goes to Saju first.
Yeah, the fintech companies, like there are many fintech companies arising recently, and they all developing a lot of amazing product. But the main thing what we see in most of the product, because they may not have that much fund, so what they go behind open source, so that they have very good developers, but they are lacking security in their DNA, right? So now, when they onboard resource, who is the developer or who is the fintech, the founder, they need to have at least the DNA security in their entire process, and they need to follow at least, if you know the CI/CD pipeline, then code review, whether it is static review or dynamic review, this should be followed in entire process, right? So what we've seen recently, most of the financial sector or any sector, what we are suspecting, like, it's not the APT guys directly hitting my web server, or they are sending some email, they are coming through supply chain. Supply chain attack is the number one thing in 2021, right? So we heard a lot of news. So this can be like, fintech companies can be used for supply chain attack. So my experience, my previous experience with vendors, like, what we need to do, at least for governance side, we need to do third-party assessment when we are having fintech company engagement. At least we need to have some standard, like, they need to follow the best practice, industry best practice standards, and they need to have complete life cycle of security reviews. That is my thoughts.
Thank you, Sajid. And Mr. Ahmed, your thought on this, please.
Yes, thanks, Mohammed. So I'm always coming after Sajid, making it difficult for me. No, what I want to say and add on top of what was mentioned, a couple of things. So first of all, the identity. So with all these fintech and emerging technologies, we have this what's called the digital identity verification. And there've been a recent, I think, statistic mentioning that this digital identity verification is predicted to reach something like 13 or 14 billion by 2024. So I think they need more improvement on these kind of things instead of the normal passwords and biometrics, maybe some kind of OTPs, as well as maybe risk-based authentication, adaptive authentication based on some location, device, biometric. This is something most important to be added. Another thing, we've mentioned the third-party components or third-party service and the reliance and how we can do the assessments. So they will be dealing with a lot of third-party requirements like the payment gateways, analytics, social media, whatever, social networks, sorry. So they need the proper assessment as mentioned, or limiting and decreasing this number of products and trying to develop these components from scratch by their own. This would be something added as well to each other. A lot of also fintech and emerging technologies are going to the cloud. And when we think about the cloud, we need to ensure that we are picking the right tool that can manage all our cloud solution in full integrity, regardless whether I'm in AWS, in Azure, or whatever. This is something very important, the integrity of these tools. And then, of course, the compliance with all policies, frameworks, standards, things like GDPR specifically, that a lot of people are facing nowadays. One last thing also, I might add also, is the data. So a lot of these fintech business that's working on a kind of a sensitive data. So they need to develop some kind of procedures in their tools to regulate this data, who can access it, granting the permissions, revoking it, all this kind of thing in their tools. So that's in a summary, what's my perspective on this question.
Thank you, Ahmed. And Dr. Tim, your thought on this, please.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially, I mean, fintech is emerging and is not going to slow anytime soon.
Yeah.
In some cases, the fintech companies have the advantage because they don't need to deal with 40 years old infrastructure in some cases. One of the best things that I've seen is implementing cybersecurity as part of their DNA from day one. Yes, they don't have a lot of money, but if you look at some industry best practices, there are quite a lot of things that even a small group of developers can do with, let's say, alignment with PCI DSS, ISO 27001, some specific things that can be part of the day-to-day operational practices. Something which is also very important is look at for some small incremental things that you can do over time. Don't expect to, boil the ocean overnight. Also, especially if you are in some sort of partnership with a big financial institution, be honest with them. If you have something that is not in place in your network or in your environment, just tell them. There's a high probability they invest 50 times more money and the resources in solving more or less similar problems. And if the value of your products is clear, of your services, some of your partners will actually invest in you and make sure that you're up to the standard, because you're as strong as your weakest link. And unfortunately, in some situations, the fintech companies are weakest links, and they need to make sure that they're up to the standard and build trust with their bigger partners. That's my view on this question.
Yeah, thank you. And now I request Dr. Jami to give his view on this.
Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that fintech obviously has its own challenges, but it does also face many of the same challenges as any other sector. So I think in that sense, the fundamentals are always going to be vital. I think especially as others have alluded to, a lot of these fintech companies will be emerging. There's an opportunity there to get the basics in from day one, but I think just making sure the fundamentals, thinking about the likes of phishing, the likes of remote desktop protocol or public facing applications, appropriate segmentation, all of that really important. And it can be easy to forget about that when we think of more exciting solutions. I'd also echo Saju's comments earlier around developer environments specifically. We see a lot of risk there, bringing in different plugins, different libraries, all of these sorts of open source tools. That's something that we see a lot of. There's a huge kind of supply chain threat there. So I think that's really important, and to really focus on those developer environments. Now there's a bit of a trade-off there, right? Because within those developer environments, we want our developers to actually be able to take risks, to be experimental, to look at different ways of doing things in a creative way. But we also want to make sure if they're bringing in all of those third-party tools, those open source bits and pieces, that they're doing so in a secure way. So thinking around the specific security policies on that issue specifically, and maybe thinking of ways to segment those developer environments, I think that's a really smart thing to be looking at. I think finally, it's that idea that security is a practice, right? It's easy to talk about security products and kind of think security by default or security by design. Really, I think it's more about security as a practice. So what are those long-term habits, routines that are going to be in place to make sure that those products remain secure even once that they have been developed and kind of released? So thinking about how vulnerabilities are going to be researched, how patches are going to be released, how they might kind of communicate with customers about the importance of all of this. I think that's all going to be really important as well.
And what do you recommend in terms of life cycle, for example, for the fintechs? Because if they have to start development from scratch, so definitely they have to follow some sort of life cycle, for example, DevSecOps sort of scenario. So where they could be better prepared and can develop an application which are more secure, because as everybody agreed, that fintech is a need, and innovation can be brought there with these fintechs. But definitely, as everybody mentioned rightly, that security is also key, which has to be taken care.
Yeah, and I think massive opportunities, right? I think if you're starting afresh, the opportunities to go via, say, cloud providers and get the kind of scale and the efficiency benefits there, as well as in many respects, the security benefits of using these kind of bigger service providers. I think the only thing I would say there is, even if you are kind of going with that option, it's important to take ownership over security, right? So if we're kind of going to go in the cloud a lot, it's easy to think, oh, it's the cloud provider's job to manage our security now. We kind of don't have to worry about it. But actually, when we look at our intelligence and the sort of threats facing cloud providers, a lot of the exploitation is around misconfiguration, use of stolen credentials, etc. So it's really important, even if you are kind of outsourcing parts of your developer environments, part of your network to the likes of Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, etc. It's important that you still retain responsibility and ownership over how that sort of area of the network is going to be secured.
Thank you, Doctor. And Shafira, now a different question to you. The question is that how are third-party like suppliers, service provider, security threats and gaps are handled in this part of your wider security strategy? So basically, the question is related to third-party security threats.
Yeah, so I mean, having the third-party security controls is very important, right? Because cybersecurity as a whole, it's no more a silo approach. It's going to be organization-wide, and of course, it's also going to be extended to whoever the partners we deal with, right? Most companies work closely with partners, service providers, and customers. Hence, it's utmost important to have a third-party security policies or a guideline so that we can constantly enforce that to our partners to ensure that they adhere to certain security measures even before they connect to our network. That's one important thing. The other one is whenever we opt for any services, like either it could be an IT services or an application, or it could be from the cloud, there should be a proper due diligence exercise carried out. So basically, we follow certain requirements, like we ask the service provider to provide us with SOC 2 Type 2 report. We also get to know about their security posture through certain collaborations with those companies. We ask them what is the current the risk level of your cybersecurity posture. So that is again one thing which is very important. And I remember one of the panelists was also mentioning about the supply chain attacks, because that is seriously, it is a matter of discussion. We need to look in more detail because that is one of the threat vector, I would call it as, because we are protecting our perimeter, we are protecting our email gateways, we are protecting our internet segment. But when it comes to the third party, definitely that is again a weaker side of a cybersecurity space. So we need to ensure that proper due diligence and proper checkpoints are being placed in order to ensure there is proper adequate security measures are there. So one thing is you can do a constant security assessment against a network, which can be covered as part of the contractual. Either it can be through a third party, or it can be we can request them for some generic report like SOC 2 Type 2 reports. And onboarding, and one more important thing is the offboarding, because when we onboard, we do a due diligence, but when we offboard these services, that is the place where we leave our data, or we leave some footprints with the third party, right? So we need to ensure that even that is getting removed completely from the third party's network. So these are some of the key areas when you are looking at the third party's service provider security. This is something which we need to look at on a collective approach.
Yeah, thank you, Shafila. So now our final question. I think we're also reaching towards the end of our session. So question here is now, how can regulators enable and support better cybersecurity practices across the BFSI sector? I think we are one of the most regulated sector. So first of all, we would like to hear from Ahmed. What are his thoughts on this, please? Mr. Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed Mahmoud.
Yes. So when it comes to the regulators, so they play a critical role. So in our sector, I think the regulators oversee three main areas, which are the banking, the financial markets, and the consumers. I think the most important thing, what's required for them to support the security and security community, which is the establishing the proper, and when I say the proper right security frameworks and standards. And by this, we need to reach some kind of a consistency across these kind of standards, across these frameworks, and ensure it's maybe stemming from the same root or applying the best security practices in it. This is very important because these standards and these practices and these regulations are one of the main topics that most of the security professionals and CISOs working on the financial markets will be dealing with this. So we need to ensure that we are using the right and proper wording, the updated security practice in it, the right vocabularies, and communicating the best concepts and practices to everyone. Another thing also that might help, which is maybe by providing some tools, templates, samples. This might help also other financial institutions when developing again and assessing the risks in their organizations. Another thing also that I see a lot of regulators that are working, which is very beneficial for the financial sector, which is driving the incident response plan and communicating on kind of a country basis widely on maybe developing some kind of an instant response or playbook for simulations or how things can affect the financial institutions. That's how I think it from my point of view.
Thank you, Emma. And Saju, your thoughts on this point, please.
I have limited knowledge on these regulations, but I will give some of my input.
Yeah.
What I see, like, the standard, like, as he told, Ahmed told, the standards. So this one is requirement, like, the technology standard should be provided by regulators. Like, for example, Oracle standard or the Linux standard. They should enforce, not only providing the standard, they should enforce the standard, and it should be implemented by financial sector, right? And also one of the thing, like, they provide this, the recommendation and all these things, but end of the day they need to set some KPI. Bank has to do this, or the financial institute has to do this, and there should be some mechanism to gauge the KPIs end of the year. So, and another one of the lacking thing, like, collaboration, as Ahmed told. So maybe, banks might be operating internationally, right? Maybe we have some branch in India, maybe something in London. So we need to follow many different regulators, and the Mr. A says me, like, you need to follow this. Mr. B tells me you follow this, right? So there should be some international, I don't know, I'm not the guy to state that, but they should, like, when they are enforcing something to the international bank, they should consider, okay, they are already following this regulation. Okay, this is okay. For example, if I drive a car in UAE, maybe I go to Australia, maybe I'm able to drive there with my UAE license, right? So same way, like, some kind of consideration.
Yeah, I think your challenge is rightly explained, because there are a lot of overlapping standards also. There's another challenge. Like,
Yeah.
for example, one standard says something, and then other standard also has some overlapping thing, plus he is also asking something extra. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Shafila, your thought on this point, please.
He actually just left for a few minutes. He'll be back. He just had to take an urgent call.
Yeah, okay. And then we can, Dr. Tim, if you can give you thought on this regulatory related.
Yeah, that's a very important question. I think over the past 3 to 5 years, the regulators globally actually improved a lot. They listened a lot more actively instead of trying to dictate what is coming and don't listen. So one of the ways to deal with regulators is engage them proactively. They have a lot of public discussions, a lot of forums where you can have your say. And remember, they are also people, and they have the capabilities to define how you can use them in the best possible way in terms of helping them with feedback on industry best practices, on standards, on anything that they want to enforce in the near future. Also, something that we do in Australia is we often invite them to have information sessions with our people and make sure that we ask them our difficult questions and get a sense of where they are. And also remember, regulators and the conversations with them, this is a two-way conversation, and we really have an opportunity to work with regulators and define the future for financial industry or critical infrastructure or whatever. So remember, they are your partner, and they can give you a lot of insights of what is coming, and you have the influence to help them with that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dr. Jemmy, your thought on this point?
It's a really interesting question, and I think at least maybe for me, most of my experience is within Europe, where you see the Bank of England with, say, CBEST, or with the European Union with TIBER, and I think there's some good case studies there of how regulators can really support the financial sector through that coordination, through that sense of defining best practices, but also actually creating really positive schemes. So if we talk about the likes of CBEST, TIBER, those are intelligence-led penetration testing schemes. So that would be where banks and financial sector organizations would get a understanding of A, what are the threats that matter, but B, they would then get red teaming and ethical hacking in place to actually test whether the prominent threat actors and hackers that are known to target say the banking sector, they can actually kind of go and emulate those sorts of attacker techniques against those banks. And those red team organizations can then start to really test, well, how effective is this bank or this financial sector organization and actually protecting against some of those attacker techniques that might occur to them in real life. So I think those are some really good ideas that we could kind of like to see scale in other parts of the world. I think also just different kind of bringing those different communities together, right? Regulators can often be the best place for intelligence sharing discussions, for sharing what's working, instances of best practice within the sector, and fundamentally creating that community, right? There's an opportunity there to collaborate, to work with peers, and I think the regulator can really be a facilitator in those discussions.
Dr. Rector, thank you, Dr. Jani. I think this makes us to the end of the session. Thank you, everyone for your time and your thought. And really, there were several interesting topics came up and discussed today. And we are open for a question and answer. And Karan, if there are any questions here, can we take? Do you have time here?
We don't have any questions, and also, nope, we don't have any questions.
Yeah.
And it's the end of the session as well. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Jamie, Dr. Tim, all the way from Australia, Saju, Mr. Ahmed, and Mohammed. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
To our sponsor, FireEye Mandiant, and also VM Software. Our next edition of the Cyber Warriors Conclave is on December 1st week, which is on 7th and 8th. We'll keep you posted with all the details.
Okay. Thank you, Karan.
Thank you.